Thursday, Beijing time, is Thanksgiving Day in the West. But here in China, one warm message that President Xi Jinping delivered at a recent top-level decision-making meeting on comprehensive and deep reform is the avowed care and poverty alleviation for millions of disadvantaged people in the cold winter. Will migrant workers have a warm shelter? Will farmers be able to fully use their rights in farming land for high income and remarkable improvement of their livelihoods? And above all, can those who execute central policies respect the rights of the vulnerable social groups in their pursuit of the local GDP? Other key issues on the agenda cover how to reform the chronic SOE issue, including the financial system to serve the real economy and create jobs. The world is watching as we are reportedly entering a new era with confidence and caution. China is getting close to the world economic and geopolitical center. The core issue remains whether China could showcase its soft power in a rule-based world and build a good image of a major responsible stakeholder. Today we are happy to be joined in the Beijing studio by He Weiwen, a senior research fellow with the Center for China and Globalization, and Lawrence Bram, founding director of the Himalayan Consensus Institute. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Up next, let's take a look at this report.
Participants at the meeting said the State Council should report management of state-owned assets to the NPC Standing Committee in a bid to ensure it is conducted in an open and transparent manner. The selection and management of officials working in poverty-stricken regions was also highlighted. This is to help choose qualified officials for poverty relief. It also aims to deal with slack management and undesirable work practices. A 3-year action plan on rural environment was approved. It will primarily focus on garbage and sewage disposal, while also working to preserve the environment. Meanwhile, chiefs will also be appointed responsibility for the environment and protecting the ecosystems of local lakes. Cultivating rural teaching staff and recruitment of general medical practitioners were also stressed during the meeting. Participants also called for the expansion of a pilot project to reform rural residential land. The project's purpose is to protect public ownership of land, farmers' interests, and arable land. Meanwhile, participants urged the Central School of the Communist Youth League of China to be innovative in running the school and emphasize political training. A regulation on legislation was passed during the meeting. It requires consultation and third-party evaluation before legislating on major adjustments of interests or controversial interests. The meeting ended by passing a guideline on deepening reform in intellectual property trials. It urged for more efforts to improve the intellectual property litigation system.
Well, that's a very substantial review of the highlights of this latest top-level decision-making meeting about the comprehensive and deep reform. Now, I'm aware that Mr. Steve Bannon, the presidential strategist of Donald Trump, delivered a speech in the immediate aftermath of the 19th National Congress that China is likely to become the superpower, surpassing the United States by the middle of this century. He delivered a code message about geopolitical rivalry, zero-sum game. Perhaps China's gain will be the loss of the United States. However, on the agenda of Mr. Xi Jinping, what do you think are the warm thoughts and the warm care for the individuals? They are human. They need to be taken care of. Unless we can showcase this sort of a soft power, do you think China will likely become a major responsible stakeholder?
Yes. Of course, China is growing and will become, of course, the world's largest economy in 15 years or sometime around that. This is just one aspect. We are not thinking in the same way as Steve Bannon is working. More important, we must focus our attention first on the people, the well-being of the people. Today is Thanksgiving Day in the West. We all in Chinese all should be grateful to those who have helped us. We should also show great concern to those people who need help. Today it happens to be very cold in Beijing, and we are now sitting in this tall building. And most of the forest of skyscrapers in the big cities are built by those migrant workers.
They
we don't know.
change the skyline of the
Yeah,
first and second tier cities.
we don't know whether they have enough shelters in the cold winter. So we must show concern to them. Unless we can do a good job to people, all the people, especially the vulnerable groups, to make them have a better life, to happy life, decent jobs and enough shelters and comfortable life. Can we say that China will become a big power?
Yes, indeed. The decency of individuals for the harmonious society in China will be the top concern of not only overseas observers, and I believe should be prioritized on the agenda of President Xi Jinping. Now, in your review of the highlights of the Quan Sheng Gai, the comprehensive deep reform, what do you think should be the most interesting issues or issues of a great concern for you?
Well, you have several things that are linked together, and key in this is moving the migrant workers who have been the focus of the construction of the coastal cities back into their villages and back into the interior. That means rebuilding the interior. For the past 2 decades, because of the huge boom on the coastal areas of China, migrant workers have come here, leaving villages empty and land untilled. So this
and
is
left
really
behind children in their thousands, the elderly, the women left behind.
But now what you need to do is the deepening of the reform or the readjustment of the Chinese economy right now also is a social reorganization. It means bringing people back to their hometowns, back to their home villages, and they're not going to want to go unless those towns and villages offer commensurate services as are available in the urban areas. This also involves land reform that will allow them to have the rights connected with land ownership that involve pension, health care, and creating those facilities. Because let's be very frank, in the rural areas, the hospital situation, the medical care situation lags far behind the urban areas on the coastline. So now you have to really have a new economic drive in the interior of China, putting these people, yes, back to work, but back to work building the cities out of the villages that have been left behind. There's another added dimension to this, and that is the whole focus now on green bonds and green finance in line with the ecological civilization policy, which has been now put into the party constitution, because these are going to need to be ecological cities that are smart, green, and blue, that are going to be able to offer not the same sort of polluted experience that the coastal development and overdevelopment has had, but a much more well-planned cities in the future in the interior.
Not only has Xi Jinping thought socialism with Chinese characteristics in the new era been written into the party constitution, but he won standing ovation for emphasizing overwhelmingly the importance of poverty alleviation. For example, he says, not a single Chinese national should be left behind in this campaign to reduce poverty. Now, when we look at the rise of farming land for the farmers, how can they improve their livelihoods?
Yes, this is of course a top concern. We say that we will hit a moderately prosperous society by 2020. That means, on average, the per capita GDP of China would hit $10,000, or the average of the world. But that is not enough. We should say that we should pay special attention to those people in the bottom, whether there are any people left behind still in poverty. That means moderate, prosperous society should be for all. Nobody should be left behind. So we should pay attention to those rural areas in the West. When I was a young student in the 1960s, I was a member of the group working in a village in the Shanxi province. This was really a poor village. The farm labor working from early morning till midnight could only make less than half a yuan. And in winter, they couldn't have enough food. So later, what we did, we just tried to make them rich by processing trade, make silk yarns. And so they make the processing trade and got rich. So in that case, no one in that village was left behind. We should do the same in the country, especially in the poor areas in the West.
At least 15 years ago, Mr. Zhang Yimou, a famous movie director, delivered a movie called 一个不能少, not a single should be left behind. He was talking about education in rural areas. By the way, there have been many intensive discussions on the social media today, the Thanksgiving Day, amongst the scholars and intellectuals here in the major cities, that migrant workers should be regarded as one of us. They should be part of the urban society instead of others. They are not alien. They have changed our skyline of the cities. They have improved the quality of our life. So when they go back home, have family reunions, because the New Year's Day is around the corner, next will be the Spring Festival. So what about their own living environment, the quality of the environment? You spoke of green financing to improve the environmental conditions. Now, what can we do to let them enjoy a big relief?
Well, first of all, a lot of the impoverished areas of China that are still left behind are off the grid, meaning there's very poor transportation, there's very poor connectivity, therefore they're left behind. Also, they're left behind in terms of, again, going back to this, medical care, pension, services, education. Of course, these are all aspects where you don't have the facilities. So really, the next stage of growth in China is going to be a more calibrated growth, focusing on creating better quality cities in these rural areas, effectively bringing together communities which are now very dispersed, and in many cases creating new cities, and trying to do it in a smart way, because a lot of the fast growth that we've seen in the past in the major cities has been overgrowth, it's been irrational growth, and now this is about recalibrating, it's about rebalancing growth, it's about a quality of growth, and that's going to have to affect water. There's a lot of contaminated water in the rural areas. I've been doing work in extremely remote places where people have high rate of cancer because of mining. So now you're going to have to be restructuring the entire usage of water, deepening wells. In many areas at high altitude, you only have 20 meters deep wells. It's not enough to get to clean water. You need 80 to 100 meters.
Good news, gentlemen.
That's a
Good
major
news is that the Chinese authorities recently decided to ban up to 24 categories of imported plastic recyclables, so that we would reduce the amount of landfills or incineration to improve the air quality, to improve quality of the farming land, because some of the landfills would have to be conducted in the rural areas.
A major part of the ecological civilization policy, again, that was written into the Chinese Communist Party constitution during the 19th Congress, is about creating a cyclical economy. To be able to have a cyclical economy means that you're going to be having recycling as an industry. And President Xi even mentioned this in his speech. This is an idea that's come in from Europe, but it's going to be enhanced and the capacity to be expanded tremendously. That will help to reduce a lot of waste that's polluting the environment.
With the improvement of the middle-class lifestyle, we have to look at the disposal of garbage. Not only Chinese homegrown garbage, but foreign garbage. I mean the recyclables. Now, another major issue on the agenda of Mr. Xi Jinping and his new team, members of the newly elected members of the Standing Committee, I'm afraid, is the reform of the SOE, including reform of the financial system, to create jobs and to reduce systematic financial risks. What do you think of the impact? And what does that mean for the real economy?
I think there are two different issues, although interrelated. First, the reform of SOEs. Second, the financial risks and the financial governance. The reform of SOEs, I think the central purpose is to have fair competition among SOEs, private enterprises and foreign enterprises registered in China. To level the field. It will rise the market access, sector access, so as to create more dynamism in the economy, more competition, the better use of resources, and to create a higher productivity. more competitive. I think this is one of the key considerations. As far as the financial reform is concerned, I think the big risk in the past few years is the financial sectors were serving itself. The money from money, money for money, without moving into the real economy. They make money within themselves, and the shadow banking was rampant. So that is a real danger. So we must shift to the internal circulation of the money to injection to support the real economy.
Some of the overseas observers who follow our financial reform pointed out recently in some of the articles that I read that they are actually supportive of the control of the capital account to stem the outbound flight of the capital. And some of the Chinese were surprised that RMB didn't depreciate despite the speculations shared by media, Chinese and foreign alike, that we could hardly withstand the impact of the financial risks and RMB will fall in the value. What do you think of pros and cons concerning debate of the exchange regime? How far are we from liberalization of the exchange regime and the interest rate?
This is something you have to understand the context also of the Belt and Road Initiative, because the creation of new financial institutions to support the outbound flow of Chinese business, like the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and the New Development Bank, are all about creating a new financial architecture. In parallel, the yuan or renminbi currency is being traded in direct swap arrangements with countries, and there are direct swaps occurring.
And then Steve Bannon will again be horrified because RMB is likely to replace
Steve Bannon out of it because he's not relevant.
Most powerful world reserve currency is the U.S. dollar.
The challenge is to the U.S. dollar. Ultimately,
do
there
you
will
think
be.
he's talking about the conspiracy theory about the Chinese government?
I leave conspiracies aside.
To phase out the use of and dominance of U.S. dollars?
Ultimately, there has to be another reserve currency, and that reserve currency will be either the renminbi, or it will be a basket of currencies around the Belt and Road countries in which the renminbi serves as a major weight currency, just like the German mark does in the euro. And so this is the vision, and it will be done country by country through swap arrangements, through what they call the expansion of the bandwidth of trading of the renminbi. But it will not be a sudden free flow of foreign exchange. It will not be a sudden liberalization as people have envisioned in the past. It will be a gradual process, and that's how I see it working. And right now, many countries are already making payment with China in yuan currency and choosing to do this.
But they
so this
are
is the process.
refusing to use online payment. They refuse to adopt Alibaba's online payment in many of the major markets here outside China.
I'd like to come back to another issue because you talked about the state-owned enterprise reform. And I think this is an area where there's a major challenge. And if there's going to be, if you're going to bring the best and the brightest back to China, there's so many Chinese overseas, they are really so technically skilled. You're going to need to offer them within the state-owned enterprise system a purely technical management competitive atmosphere. If you're going to have a lot of political guidelines within the state-owned enterprise, it's one thing for the state to own the majority shares of an enterprise, but if you're going to try to guide it politically, that's going to restrict bringing some of the best and brightest
in
back
our
who want
serious
to be
and comprehensive
competitive.
reform of the SOE, one critical issue is the management of the state-owned assets to prevent assets from falling into the hands of the private business or private enterprises. To what degree do you think we are able to handle this issue?
I think this is not a big problem because we say that it's important, the prime task for the SOE's asset management is to secure its value and even to increase its value. Not
the
to
mechanism
make, yes,
of
the
PPP?
mechanism, yes. No, not only PPP, no, not only PPP. You can have a minor mixed ownership. It does not change the assets. And then if you can develop in a market, have a strong competition, have a growth of your companies, you can have the increase of the asset value of the SOEs. It's not contradictory.
But how do you assess the impact of opening up our markets for overseas financial services? And they are encouraged to take more of the shares, more than 50% in some cases.
In a few years.
I'd like to have your risk assessment here, Lawrence.
You're going to have a very competitive environment, and therefore the state-owned financial institutions can continue to be state-owned, but you want to bring in the best and the brightest, your financial whiz kids, people who are going to be competitive traders and competitive investment bankers. And to do that, you're going to need to allow them to play the investment game entirely according to the rules of the market, because that's what they do best if you're going to be competing. The state can still own majority shares or have control. It's not about public-private partnership. It's just about having the best technocrats at the helm of your institution.
I think before we fully open our banks to foreign competitors, we should do good reforms within the state-owned banks in China. That means we should make them fully competitive internationally. They should be managed in the top, most up-to-date international way and the most modernized management, so as they can be able to compete anywhere in the world. In that case, that would be good. When we welcome foreign bankers, players come in the Chinese market. All the players, no matter state-owned, private, or foreign, invested, they can work together on the Chinese market, compete with each other, so as to bring the best benefits for our economy and the people. I don't think that's a big problem. You'll say that even now we have foreign banks already, although minor shares. We have Citi, we have HSBC. For my personal feeling, I still deposit my money in Chinese state-owned banks.
One thing that has deeply impressed overseas observers about China's comprehensive reform is the fight against the corruption and the political will. Now, very quickly, President Xi Jinping was able to establish his political authority, which of course would help lay the groundwork for comprehensive reform. The political will does matter, but does it mean that laws of the market economy will have to be compromised? To what degree do you think obstacles in the way of reform will be overcome and steered clear of because of the political consensus and political will? Because some of the conservative members of the think tanks said to me, Ray, if you want to do the show about the outcome of the 19th National Congress or the latest meeting of the Qiansheng, you have to look at the issue of political will. Mr. Xi Jinping is said by the Western media, arguably, he's the strongest politician since the era of Mao Zedong or Deng Xiaoping. To what degree do you think that will help?
An anti-corruption campaign and rules of the market are two different issues. Actually, one of the reasons why there was so much corruption is there weren't any rules, or rules were vague. And officials used the opportunity in power to make money while they were in power, and because that was their only way of doing it. So an anti-corruption campaign, if anything, is actually going to establish rules by which the market can function.
One major obstacle in the way of China's comprehensive deep reform of the economy is the lobby groups, the interest groups. So without fully establishing the political authority, you're going to repeat the mistakes of excessive decentralization of the central powers. For example, what happened prior to Mr. Xi Jinping's taking office, the decrease in orders would not be able to lead the Zhongnanhai, Zhengling bu zhu Zhongnanhai. So that's what we are concerned with. And I believe Mr. Xi Jinping is fully aware of the pitfall, of the dangers. Therefore, political will does count. It does matter, right, Wei Wen?
Yes. I think President Xi Jinping has reiterated it again and again that the top principle is the central leadership. The whole party and the whole country, the whole party should follow, obey to the central committee. and to central leadership. Only by the central authority can we do something very great, can move on. As far as to the lobbying, I think the lobbying is exists.
Interest
groups are everywhere in the world. It's not something special in China. I think the important thing is the central leadership should be clear about the fundamental interests of China, of the Chinese people. Don't be moved by those interest groups. And also, equally important, we should make success in individual cases to prove to the whole party, to the whole society, that only this way is correct. It's good for everybody.
Lawrence?
Look, it's because there's political willpower that China is now leading in the battle against climate disruption.
But we face a skeptical international audience who says loud and clear, look, China is not a Western democracy. So if you emphasize the importance of political will, you go back to dictatorship or whatever, they would have their discourse of the political science to generate headlines and to say, hey, China will challenge our lifestyles, will challenge our values.
Talk about democracy.
Right?
President Trump and President Bush Jr. were both elected by the Electoral College, not by the American popular vote. And if you had a referendum in America tomorrow, everybody would vote to abolish the Electoral College, which is a mercantile, post-feudal era mechanism to prevent popular voting. So they have nothing to say about it. The issue here is, because of political willpower, we are actually seeing momentous move now in transforming China's grid from coal, which historically it's been about 70% coal, now very aggressively toward renewable energy, green energy, and in this case it's been shown, you know, the climate change talks that have just taken place in Bonn, China is leading the world on the fight against climate disruption, while Trump is bringing us right back into the Industrial Revolution and coal. And in that case, it's political will. Does America have the technology? Of course it does. It doesn't want to apply it.
The central planning did help the Chinese authorities at different levels to ensure effectiveness and efficiency of the economic reform. However, on the second stage of our reform, comprehensive one, is how to handle the relationship and keep the balance between efficiency and social justice. Do you think the rule of law will play that critically important role?
I think they are, of course, interrelated. First, we should make the market play the decisive role in the allocation of resources. That has been reiterated by the 19th Party Congress. There's no doubt about it.
To my knowledge, that's the outcome
should
of
be
the
based on the market competition.
The
then market competition should, of course, generate some disparities, rich and poor. Then the government should take its obligation that the social policies should follow to levy the rich and to support the poor. That's, I think, the duty of the government.
And therefore, the establishment of the supervisory ministry, 监察部, to cover both the party and the civil society, I mean civilians, civil servants. With that, we come to the end of this meaningful discussion about how to showcase China's soft power by the middle of this century. We not only will get rich, but whether China will be respected as a result of a comprehensive and deep reform. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.